Hey, welcome. So if you've spent, any time at all on the internet, you've seen the words capitalism and socialism just thrown around everywhere, right? They're used as insults, as rallying cries, and honestly, they often just create more heat than light. So in this explainer, we're going to try to cut through all that noise and get to what these powerful ideas really mean.
For a lot of people, capitalism is just the engine of progress. It's the ultimate expression of individual liberty, the freedom to build something, to innovate, and to succeed on your own terms.
But for its critics, it's a system that's fundamentally unfair. The whole thing, they argue, is designed to funnel wealth to the very top by exploiting the work of the many for the profit of a few.
Then you've got socialism, and that's a word you often hear linked with, well, authoritarian control, the loss of personal choice, and this idea of a massive state dictating every little aspect of your life.
And yet, for its supporters, socialism is the complete opposite. They see it as the path to a more just and fair society, one that puts the well-being of the whole community and equality way above individual profit.
I mean, with views that are so polar opposites, it's pretty clear we're not always talking about the same thing, are we? So to get to the bottom of this, we need to push past the angry labels and just look at the core ideas themselves.
And to do that, we first have to untangle two concepts that get mixed up all the time in these debates: the economic system and the political system. This is a really crucial distinction.
Okay, first up, the economic system. This is all about the stuff a society creates. We're talking about the resources, the factories, the land. It's basically the blueprint for how we produce and hand out goods and services. And at their heart, both capitalism and socialism are economic systems.
A political system, on the other hand, that's all about power. It's about how a country is actually run. Is it a democracy with free elections, or is it an authoritarian state where control is totally centralized? That's a separate question, though, as we're about to see, it definitely gets connected to the economic one. So, if we strip away all the rhetoric, all the shouting, the fundamental difference between capitalism and socialism really boils down to one single question: who owns the means of production? In capitalism, it's pretty straightforward. The big stuff, the factories, the companies, are owned by private individuals or corporations, and their main goal? To make a profit. In socialism, those same things are owned by society as a whole. Now, that can look different in practice. It could be state ownership, or cooperatives run by the workers, or community ownership. But that core distinction, private versus social ownership, that's the absolute key.
Okay, so who owns the stuff? Seems simple enough, right? Well, that one single difference has massive, and I mean massive, implications for how power is spread out in a society, and what things like freedom and democracy can actually look like.
Which brings us to one of the biggest and, let's be honest, most common accusations you hear leveled against socialism, that it's inherently authoritarian. So, the big question: does it require a dictator?
The short answer? A simple, flat-out no. And the reason why comes down to a really important distinction between two very different ways of thinking about socialism.
See, it's absolutely vital to separate authoritarian socialism, which does centralize power and get rid of political freedom, from democratic socialism. Democratic socialism is this broad tradition that aims to achieve its economic goals within a system of representative democracy and the rule of law, not by tearing it down.
And this really shows us the main criticisms each system has for the other when it comes to freedom. From one point of view, in capitalism, the real power isn't always with the voters. It can be with the wealthy owners of capital. They can use their money to lobby politicians and influence laws, which might end up overriding what the public actually wants. From the other side, the critique of socialism is that when you put all economic control into the hands of the state, you risk giving political leaders way too much power, which could lead to repression and a loss of individual freedom.
Okay, so let's bring these big ideas down to earth a little bit. How do these systems actually affect things like your wages, your job, and the price of the stuff you buy every day?
When we think about capitalism, we often picture its so-called father, Adam Smith, and this idea of laissez-faire, a completely hands-off, unregulated market. That's the popular image, anyway.
But the reality is, well, it's a lot more complicated than that. Smith, the supposed champion of pure capitalism, actually supported government funding for public goods like roads and even education. He wasn't against all regulation, and maybe most surprising of all, he flat out warned that the interests of business owners are often directly opposed to the interests of the public.
Now, a core critique of capitalism comes from this concept in Marxist theory called surplus value. The idea is actually pretty simple. Workers create a certain amount of value with their labor, but they only get paid a part of that value back as a wage. The rest of it, the surplus, is taken by the owners as profit. And for critics, that's the very definition of exploitation.
This exact tension plays out perfectly in the debate over the minimum wage. Proponents argue that a higher wage is essential to fight inequality and fix the power imbalance that exists between big employers and individual workers. The counter-argument, though, is that forcing wages up messes with the free market and that businesses will just end up passing those extra costs onto all of us through higher prices.
The thing is, in the real world, purely capitalist or purely socialist countries don't really exist. Pretty much every nation is a mixed economy, borrowing ideas from both. And out here, both systems run into really complex challenges, like corruption and how to provide essential services like healthcare.
Take corruption. Turns out no system is immune. In capitalist economies, you might see something called rent-seeking. That's a fancy term for when companies lobby politicians to get special rules or monopolies that let them make a ton of money without actually creating any new value for society. In authoritarian socialist states, corruption might look more like officials demanding bribes to give you access to state-controlled resources. The methods are different, but the problem is still there.
Healthcare gives us another really clear contrast. A market-based, capitalist approach often treats healthcare like any other product or service. Your access to it depends on your ability to pay for it. A socialist or social democratic approach, however, usually sees healthcare as a fundamental social right, which leads to universal systems designed to give care to every citizen, no matter how much money they have.
So what we've seen is that these aren't just angry words to throw around online. They represent fundamentally different ways of thinking about ownership, power, and what a society should be. And since no country is purely one or the other, the world we live in is a messy mix of all these ideas. So that leaves a final question for you. As you look at the world around you, which of these ideas do you see at play? And which direction do you think we're all headed?